Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving headfirst into literally one of the most mysterious, mind-bending concepts in all of psychiatry, and that's human identity. Like what actually makes you, you. Today we're unpacking the theoretical foundations of something called ego consciousness. We'll be looking super closely at the exact nuts and bolts mechanics of what actually happens when our human sense of self just fractures. It's fascinating stuff.
Think about this for a second. How do you know where you end and the outside world begins? I mean, most of us never even have to ask that, right? We just walk around assuming it with total, unquestioning certainty. But here's the kicker. The self isn't some solid, indestructible monolith. It's actually this highly complex, continuously constructed, and ultimately incredibly fragile phenomenon.
Now, in clinical psychopathology, psychiatrists don't just treat the self as this blurry, one-size-fits-all entity. They use the term Ich-Bewusstsein. It's a German word that basically translates to ego consciousness or self-experience. Some seriously brilliant minds in the field, like Karl Jaspers and Christian Scharfetter, realized something huge. Our self-awareness is actually made up of distinct, formal characteristics. And the crazy part? These parts can break down completely independently of one another.
So we can actually map out this blueprint of human consciousness across 5 distinct dimensions. Those are ego vitality, ego activity, ego unity, ego identity, and ego demarcation. All right, let's start with dimension number 1, ego vitality, which is our awareness of being. Okay, so when you're completely healthy, ego vitality is just your baseline, everyday certainty that you exist. You don't even think about it. But when that vitality gets disturbed, we see a really fascinating and, frankly, terrifying spectrum. On the mild to moderate end, you've got depersonalization. That's feeling unreal, numb, or totally detached. From a neurobiological standpoint, we often explain this using the frontal-limbic inhibition model. Basically, your prefrontal cortex goes into overdrive and over-inhibits your emotional centers, which makes the whole world feel totally flat and lifeless. Then, if we look at a severe, delusional collapse, we see nihilistic delusions, or delusions of negation. This is the absolute extreme, where a patient genuinely, truly believes they simply do not exist at all. Nowhere around it. It's a profound break. To really anchor this bizarre pathology to a visceral, human experience, consider the words of a patient treated by the psychiatrist Eugene Minkowski back in 1970. The patient simply said, "I am a walking shadow." Just think about that. That unquestionable certainty of being alive vanishes entirely, and it leaves the patient completely devoid of their vital spark.
Let's move right along to our second dimension. This is ego activity, otherwise known as the awareness of agency.
The absolutely crucial concept to grasp here is minus. Healthy ego activity means you know without a doubt that you are the sole agent initiating your own actions. But in psychopathology, particularly in schizophrenia, this completely breaks down. We call these pathological passivity experiences or MAID phenomena. This includes thought alienation subtypes, so things like feeling your thoughts are being literally inserted into your head or broadcasted out loud to others. It also includes somatic passivity, where you genuinely feel bodily sensations are being caused by some outside force. I mean, imagine the absolute terror of feeling your own arm move and genuinely experiencing it as being puppeteered by someone else. It's chilling.
All right, transitioning now to the third dimension. This is ego unity, or singleness.
In our everyday lives, there's just this implicit assumption that you are seamlessly integrated as one single person, right? But this whole assumption of singleness is radically lost in conditions like dissociative identity disorder, where the self literally fractures into distinct identities. And yet, what's maybe even more conceptually challenging is something called autoscopy. This is where the actual physical unity of the self appears completely compromised.
So autoscopia actually manifests across several wildly bizarre phenotypes. It ranges from a relatively simple feeling of presence, feeling like there's some wraith-like observer nearby, all the way to negative autoscopy. That's where a patient literally looks in a mirror and fails to perceive their own body. Crazy, right? Then you have inner autoscopy and autoscopic hallucinations. But maybe you're more familiar with an out-of-body experience. That's when the observing self is projected totally outside the physical body into extrapersonal space. But for sure, the most striking of all is heutoscopia proper. This is where an individual actually encounters their own doppelganger. And their sense of self, their observing self, actually flickers back and forth between their real physical body and the hallucination. Just wow.
So how is that even physically possible?
Well, research tells us autoscopy basically comes from the brain failing to integrate its own data, specifically proprioceptive, tactile, and visual information. And it's often paired with vestibular dysfunction. Basically, your balance and spatial awareness go offline. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Researchers like Blank and Arzi found that if you apply transmagnetic stimulation directly to a brain area called the left temporal parietal junction, you can actually induce a doppelganger experience in a patient. It really highlights just how a severe dysfunction in the brain's mirror neuron system leads to this profound self-other blurring.
Moving right along, we arrive at the fourth dimension, ego identity, which is all about continuity.
Identity is basically the awareness that you have a continuous biography over time. You are the same person today that you were yesterday. But when that identity snaps, patients can experience a sudden, jarring sense of complete personality change. This could look like a profound religious rebirth experience. Then you have possession states. Karl Jaspers actually pointed out that we have to carefully differentiate these into dissociative trances versus schizophrenic states where the patient actually has clear consciousness. And then, perhaps the most extraordinarily rare phenomenon of all is lycanthropy. This is where the continuous thread of human identity shatters so completely that the person develops the delusion they are physically transforming into an animal.
And finally, we reach our fifth and last dimension on the blueprint, ego demarcation, which deals with our psychological boundaries.
Ego demarcation is essentially our ability to confidently draw a line and distinguish what is myself from the outside world. But when the ego's boundaries start to dissolve, the mind just conceptually cracks wide open. The self becomes totally permeable. It's like you start leaking out into the world, and the world comes rushing back in.
In something like schizophrenia, severe boundary loss results in really terrifying delusions. We're talking about thought insertion or withdrawal. It's a fundamental collapse in what psychologists call theory of mind. Basically, the brain just loses its ability to correctly attribute mental states between the self and other people. But here's the thing, boundary dissolution isn't exclusively psychotic. We actually see it in non-psychotic states too, like during profound meditative ecstasy or LSD intoxication, which are linked to hyperactivation of the anterior insula in the brain. So what's the key difference here? Well, in ecstatic states, the boundary loss is an as-if experience. It's mediated by overwhelmingly positive emotion. But in schizophrenia, that core structural boundary of the self has totally, involuntarily collapsed.
Which brings us to a final, really provocative thought. We've just seen that your vitality, your agency, your singleness, your continuous identity, and even your personal boundaries, none of these are permanent fixtures of the universe. They are just active, continuous constructions being maintained by some incredibly delicate neurobiology. So the question I want to leave you with today is this. If our entire unified sense of self is really just a continuous construction project run by the brain, what happens when the architect blanks? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me today as we explored the incredibly fragile yet beautiful puzzle that is human consciousness. See you next time.